Njike, njike, oye, oye. Njike, njike, atawana yoda wakuru wadosi.
Wait a minute. Oh, right. Wake up. Okay. All right, so let me see. Today's lecture I'm giving to cover what's covered in the midterm. Those of you viewing at home, there's a Word document on the Moodle site that matches what I'm be handing out in class. I didn't have time to animate it because spending too much time in front of a computer, so I just did a straight Word document so everybody takes the same test. All the information you have has already either been done in a lecture or a PowerPoint, so there you go, or is searchable from somewhere else. So one of the things, okay, so by way of explanation, one of the reasons you may wonder, not that anybody asked, but you may wonder why I spent so much time on Six Nations. And part of the reason I did that, and why do you do that in an African American class, is because Six Nations was a major refuge in the colonies for black people who were escaping slaves. And there is another way which, you're not necessarily going to get this point of view, but I actually created a couple of different lectures for a series I was doing at Country Fair about spoken word. And it was basically talking about recovering the white roots of peace. And basically the white roots of peace are the organizing principles around Iroquois Six Nations, starting in about 1142. And the reason that we have that specific date is because the not so much legend, so what's a legend? And what's the difference between a legend and a myth and scriptural truth? Well, in Western civilization, okay, if we're a Christian nation and we actually believe that this illiterate, itinerant traveling carpenter could do fish dinners and all the wine you could drink, could walk on water, heal the sick, etc., and we're basically based on evidence of writings that were written down 50 years after he died, and that's true. Now, I'm not going all atheist on you because I ain't an atheist. But we're saying that that's true, and anything in any other religion is a myth. Oh, like there was no real Zeus. There were no unicorns and centaurs and giants. They're just making all that stuff up. It's a metaphor. That's from our 21st century point of view, right? So, the legend that created Six Nations, or basically they're talking about, it was a time where there was war, there was cannibalism, kids were getting sexually abused, women were getting raped, and so you have these two people, the great peacemaker, and his cohort Hiawatha, and they create the framework around which 5, then 6 nations can come together and create long houses, etc., etc. And since they weren't working on the Julian calendar or the Gregorian calendar, but they did specify that there was a solar eclipse during this time, the sun was out, it became dark, and then the sun came back again. So Americans basically said, okay, well, there was such an event in 1142. And it happened here. So yes, then this must have been happening. So that's why we have that date, 1142. In any case, the idea is indigenous democracy. All right? So the reason for focusing on 6 nations or native nations at all is that Africans were in America before there was an America. We had made early first contact with some native nations, most of the ones like in Mexico, but probably elsewhere. If you can sail the circuit of the world, then you're probably going to be able to make some contact with other folks and have a trading relationship. And there was a trading relationship internally, according to Native Americans, trading copper and jewelry and other technologies across the continent. So if the African word for this continent is Atalanta, which means water and metal, even though they do have the same metal in Africa, okay, they got to trade something, especially if you have the transatlantic and trans-Pacific sea routes. So our form of democracy, that is the African and native democracy, was the same. That is, every adult was a citizen, and political leaders could be of many genders and many gender expressions. You are like going to sleep too often, and I think I know why. You need power. There now. Happy? Thanks. So, while some native nations had slavery and even had African slaves after they began to be imported, treatment of them was better than among the whites. So, for example, in white indentured servants, which are basically being treated as if they were slaves by being beaten, particularly women, might escape into Indian country where they could live a much more freer life. So this is part of a series of lectures that I did at Country Fair, basically talking about recovering the white roots of peace, and it's germane to give you a better construct because it's not going to be an Asante. And you do need to know this about our democracy, where it came from. The Founding Fathers had no model for a government other than genetic monarchies. They didn't have democracy where they came from. And the schools that existed here, the universities that were created here, were basically on the European model, and they're going to be teaching the traditional canon, and that doesn't mean democracy. So where would they learn it? Well, they're an Indian country. And that's where, and the major Indian nations that they're dealing with is 6 nations. All through that. Okay? The Pilgrims, encountered the Wampanoag, which was a branch of 6 nations. The Pequot, branch of 6 nations. The Pequot was basically like the Federal Reserve for Indian country. So one of the things that I talked about in my central thesis with this is that when you have these democracies going, they represent a threat. Especially if you're losing your workforce to them. They represent a threat anyway because they're military powers. So as an example, I had, you don't have to go to the blog, but it's useful to go to the blog because when I talk about certain things I don't talk about in class or generally. So for example, I was talking with one of your fellow students, not in this class, but goes to Lane. He's a Tea Partier. He's actually from Boston. And he basically espouses the Tea Party values, which, you know pretty much where I'm at. I'm not there. But if I'm seeing this person, I have to put aside my personal political values and focus on, what his needs are. So part of what his needs were, though he didn't necessarily see it that way, said, look, because he made some comment. I said, so you're from Boston. What do you know about the Tea Party, the original Tea Party? Well, wait, you're from Boston, where they had the original Tea Party. What was it? I mean, I grew up in California, so we knew about the gold rush. We knew about, why Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, San Diego, all those were Spanish missions in Mexico. That's why they're there, 20 days, a day's journey between each one because the Indians might have been hostile or whatever. Same mythology, right? Every state has its own history that they teach to the young. What's the Tea Party? Okay, well, it's white folks protesting another set of white folks, and the protesters are dressing up as Indians and dumping British tea into the bay. That's the Tea Party. Oh, really? Yeah. Okay. Why were they doing it? Oh, taxation without right. Okay. But Indians didn't have taxes. But they were military power. And then he said, wait, they're not civilized. There was no civilization here. So you know how I reacted to that. Oh, really? They're dressing up as Indians because the British don't dare go after Six Nations. Because they're a military power. Always had been. What do you think about, when the Pilgrims are first at Plymouth Rock, the sachem, the chief, walks up to them speaking flawless English and French. And he's telling them about all the surrounding tribes and how many warriors they have. Like, do you get the subtext here? Don't mess up. Because I got backup besides the people we, got here. Right? Six Nations, military power. Now, some people may not think of them as a dictatorship, but whatever. Indians would have no reason to raid a British ship and throw the tea. They were just using it as a disguise, but there's a reason why they're using that disguise. Because you don't mess with them. And one of the reasons you don't mess with them is, besides them being a military power, they've got stuff that you don't. So I'm saying they not only have civilization, but they have the model for democracy that you didn't have. Okay, difference being, right? So the White Roots of Peace refer to the code developed in the 10th century here in northeastern Turtle Island among the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy as it's known in English. Now, the White Roots of Peace is a combination, if we were going to talk about it in English terms, it's like a constitution, it's like a Bible, and it's like local ecological law. Okay? So that, we're a people of the longhouse, and you can cut enough trees to build a longhouse, but we never clear-cut a forest. We never clear-cut a forest because it's not your forest. It's your grandchildren's forest who haven't been born yet. So that when we sit in council, we take into account not just 7 generations as it's rendered into English. Actually, the actual phrase is, as long as the rivers flow and the grass grows. So that doesn't really work well in English, so we say 7 generations. So they sit in council and they make decisions based on 140 years in the past and 140 years into the future in council. So you can't take an action that affects future generations except positively. Here in our world, a corporation doesn't think more than 2-3 quarters ahead. We're talking 6 months. Governments, our government thinks in 4-year terms, maybe 8 if you get reelected. That's nothing, really. That's not even a generation. So part of what we're looking at here in our democracy, so the original white roots refers to the roots of the sacred white pine, which shelters all the people and from which longhouses are made. So these are the people of some of the original longhouses. So that clan system that I talked about, the Iroquois Confederacy being composed of 6 nations. Each nation has clans. Person clans the same as their mother's clan. We already talked about the matrilineal system. And prior to the great peacemaker in Hiawatha, who came roughly in 1142, there were numerous other clans. So clan mothers would select chiefs, and basically in order to be a chief, you had to be a blood relative of a clan mother or a relative by marriage to a clan mother. So clan mothers could select chiefs. So this is representative democracy. And a chief represented the nation. You had to have one chief from each clan. Therefore, it could add up to 50, which I find a little bit more than coincidental why there are 50 states in the United States. Anyway. So, remind chiefs of their duties, give clan names to children, distribute goods to those who have died, and meet obligations to sacred societies. The clan mothers also evaluate the chief's dedication to those who are yet to come, up to the 7th generation. And the clan system still exists today among those who follow the traditional system, but many Iroquois of all faiths, meaning that some have converted to Christianity, at least, among other things, or Baha'ism, or any number of religions. The traditional government chiefs were responsible to help those in their clans, and as a mark of identity, they might even wear or display their clan on like a sigil or in front of their house, etc. Now, in this model, so when whites came, white women, African slaves, and others would often escape oppressive colonial society and live with indigenous people, rightfully seeing a greater freedom than that afforded under colonial governments, which began to pass laws guaranteeing rights and privileges by race and, of course, gender instead of everybody. So the Founding Fathers, quote, "we the people," did not mean all human beings present. It's like the indigenous credo translated into English as all my relations. Of course, in that framework does not just mean only human beings, but others in which sentience or consciousness may be found. So rocks, trees, rivers, animals, etc. But you have to have the wits and culture to perceive it as intelligence. So, all my relations is not the same as we the people, which in any case, the Founding Fathers don't mean every human being present without restriction. Okay? In this democracy, it means every human being present, plus animals and those who are unborn. So, yes, they were warlike, but here's how the context of when we go to war. It's the clan mothers that decide when we go to war. But they let the chiefs be the negotiators for whether we go to war. So, here's how it works. The 2 chiefs that have a dispute between their 2 clans or 2 nations have to meet before all the people of those nations in open council. So imagine you're arguing your case in front of hundreds of people. And if you fail to reach an agreement without we only go to war if you can't come to an agreement in 3 sessions. And you can be unsheathed at any time. So we ain't going to war just because you can't get along with somebody, personally. You can't get along, you're unsheathed. And we find a way to work it out because the clan mothers are taking it, so it's the women who are deciding whether we're going to war or not. Because it's their sons or daughters that are going to be going to war. So it better be a better reason than you can't get along with somebody. Now imagine what the white Founding Fathers sitting in on a council like that. Wait, the women are making this decision? No, we can't do that, right? They're not educated to even have that in their mind, that women could be leaders even though you have a queen sitting on the throne. Literally, Thomas Jefferson, when he's dealing with King George, part of the history that I didn't really tell you about is King George had a genetic malady which made him go crazy for 6 months at a time. Parliament had to pass a special law for Charlotte to take over the government while he was crazy. But the history books talk about her like she's a simple housewife. Like, right, okay, she speaks 7 languages and all that, and she's a simple housewife? I don't think so. But, all right, so the followers of the White Roots of Peace created a society where there were no poor people, no hungry people, no domestic violence or rape, no addiction, where two spirits and others who weren't heterosexual were considered gifts to society, not an aberration. But in any case, were not prevented from having crucial roles in society. Bottom line, they were welcoming to you if you were unfortunate and came to them respectfully and were willing to work to contribute to the good of society. You could join their society. Didn't believe in illegal immigrants. Pilgrim. So part of the piece then is looking at that as a model of democracy, which was here before contact. So the great peacemaker himself said, Be strong of mind, O chiefs. Carry no anger and hold no grudges. Think not forever of yourselves, O chief, nor of your own generation. Think of continuing generations of our families. Think of our grandchildren and of those yet unborn whose faces are coming from beneath the ground. So, by convention, he's known as the great peacemaker because in their particular spiritual beliefs, you don't call somebody's name unless you actually want them there present. And so you don't call them in like everyday discourse. So, great peacemaker. I don't know why they don't apply that to Hiawatha, but hey. So, I did this. All right, so one of the books that helped build this class was Lerone Bennett's classic Before the Mayflower, which you can still get, but goes in and out of print. And he refers to the run-up to the Civil War as the generation of crisis. So generation is about 20 years or so. But this crisis that he's referring to has been going on since the founding of the country, and I'm going to kind of set the context of that. So from the African American experience perspective, the crisis is that black people have fought in every war that America's ever fought in, and most are still not citizens up to this point. So when you think about what makes citizenship, like we have some illegal immigrants that have come here that are able to enlist in the military and go fight for a country that they're technically not a citizen of, but when they come back, they have veterans benefits and then they apply for citizenship, et cetera, because they've demonstrated a commitment to the country, willing to lay your life and limb on the line, that most citizens in America are not called to do on. Now, I grew up when there was a draft. My draft number was, in Vietnam was 35, and they were taking up to 50. So I definitely would have gone if, they hadn't ended the draft in my sophomore year of college. So that was a reality. You still have to sign up for selective service even though there's no draft, right? Or you can, voluntarily enlist within the military. So the S word, slavery, is the big issue. And money is also the issue. So Bennett uses a term that I've referred to. So it's shibboleth. And if you remember when I talked about, there's a line in Judges in the Bible, for those of you who are Christian framework, when the nation of Israel, after the Exodus, is being run by a succession of different folks, and one of them being judges, And one of the judges is named Deborah, the only woman judge mentioned in the Bible, and she dispatches the good general Barak. Right, so that's where the president's name comes from. It's biblical. So not only in Hebrew, Barak means, in Arabic it means blessing, and in Hebrew similar meaning. So that's where the name comes from. It means blessing, right? So a shibboleth, a word or pronunciation that distinguishes people of one group or class from those of another. A word or phrase identified with a particular group or cause, a catchword, a commonplace saying or idea. This is also synonymous with a concept that I've talked about before that you may be familiar with now, meme. A shibboleth is a form of meme, replicating idea that carries its own baggage and history and meaning and is a code word. What we refer to, when we talk about dog whistle, right? So a real dog whistle, only dogs can hear that frequency. Humans can't hear it. So a dog whistle now is basically a code phrase, as it's being used in common parlance, a code phrase that racists use that doesn't sound overtly racial but has a racial history or baggage, despite whatever the facts are. So urban. Urban means black on Billboard pop charts. Crossover artists, Michael Jackson's popularity. Oh, he's black, but he sells pop. Popular music. What becomes popular? And who becomes crossover? Urban, code word for black. Welfare, code word for blacks not working, even though most of the people on welfare are white people. Always have been. Right? But nobody thinks of it that way. Welfare. Oh, welfare moms, etc., etc. Word or catchword, a commonplace saying or idea. Custom or practice that betrays one as an outsider. Ultimately, from the Hebrew shibboleth, which means a torrent of water, from the use of this word to distinguish one tribe from another who pronounced it shibboleth. So, in Judges, basically, they're fighting a war. They look alike because they're the same folks. Remember when we learned early on that it's black Egyptians enslaving black Israelites? It's black people. We're having wars in Africa. So who are these folks? Halt, who goes there? Pronounce this word. If they pronounce it incorrectly, you're the enemy.